I'm having trouble with these microphones, so if anybody can't hear me at any point in the back, just put your hand up or put your hand up to your ear, and I'll make a note. Okay, so we've been talking a lot. It just melts me to hear everybody talking about how we have to measure, We weren't talking about that just a few years ago. And so what I want to talk about is, okay, how do we measure? And we're going to be talking specifically about distributed work, mobile work, but the principles that I'm talking about are same for any kind of change. So our research shows that a typical employer can save about $10,000 per employee per half-time remote worker per year. And that's based on a number of different factors. That the calculator that he mentioned it looks something like this, and on the one side you've got the assumptions for what the change is going to be across these factors of productivity, real estate, absenteeism, turnover, continuity of operations, and that's how we get to about that $10,000. Now, of course, you're going to question where the numbers on the left-hand side came from. And I can assure you that we've done a great deal of research. Over the last 11 years, we have tagged and collected over 4,000 documents that have to do with anything we can put our eyeballs on that has to do with workplace strategy. So in this case, I've done a search on productivity and remote work, and then those that were coincided, and there's 151 references. So anybody can say that productivity is going to go up by this amount, and real estate costs are going to go down by that, but we've actually done the research to prove it, and that's kind of the crucial issue. So importantly, we need to start measuring what matters, and it's not this. And I'm so happy to hear, I think just about every presentation we've heard in this room over the last 3 days acknowledges that it's about the people, and that we've really got to start measuring what's going on with the people. Because at the end of the day, they're 10 times more expensive than the space they occupy. They're many, many times more valuable than the space that they occupy. And yet, we build these places as though they don't even exist. I mean, even in this room, we're having conversations today about, well, we're just going to go to, all this one-size-fits-all office, and no consideration of the people. So, first of all, why do we need to quantify? Why do we need to have these measurements? Well, the first thing is the business case. You've got to get the money, right? And the way you're going to get the money is to make a connection to the C-suite. And that's kind of how I came at this business. I started out as a banker. So when I started to get involved in this industry, it shocked me that nobody was making the C-suite analysis. Nobody was saying, hey, did you know you could save this much money by doing this? And I think actually the recession was a bit of a blessing in some ways, because it lofted the conversation to the C-suite. Yes, it was focused on real estate, it was focused on saving money, but at least it took it out of the realm of real estate or HR or IT, and the C-suite was saying, yes, we want to be involved in this. And then I think they began to see that it's not only about saving money in real estate. So that's the first reason, to make the business case. And as we heard earlier, you don't just have to make the business case once, you've got to make it to various constituents. It's got to be to the C-suite. Once you sell them, you've got to sell the middle managers, you've got to sell the employees. And in each case, you've got to show, why are we being asked to do this, and what's in it for me? The answer is going to be different. I mean, that's just the way we are. The answer is going to be different in all three cases. So the second reason you need to is because, would you invest your money in the stock market or give your money to a friend and say, here, give it back when you want or whatever? How about the return on investment? You just ignore whether or not the money is performing? Of course you wouldn't. And yet we do that in workplace all the time. If we do a pre-measurement, then we don't do post-measurements. And even if we do them, sometimes we don't compare them, we don't circulate them, or we don't talk about them, and all the case studies have to be masked, and they can't have somebody's name on it. Well, if we really want to champion this, we've got to be out there telling the story. So I would really encourage you to participate in that, and get your organizations to participate in that. So it's an iterative process. We heard that earlier too. It's never really over. And so if we really want to inform decisions, if we really want to create workplaces that work, we have to learn from the metrics. We have to learn from the qualitative and quantitative results. So it informs results. So these are some of the things that we would look at in terms of return on investment, some of the things that we would measure. And the first thing you'll see is that many of them don't come out of real estate, don't come out of facilities. They come out of HR, they come out of IT, they come from people. You know, some of these words you might not even be familiar with. And the point of the slide is that we've got to start broadening the conversation. It's a holistic change. We've got to look at it across these silos. We've got to get these other folks involved. They've got some great data that they can share. We can even go backwards in time. You didn't do the pre-measurement, fine. We can go get some data from a few years ago that they were already keeping over there in HR, or that the benefits company was keeping, or whatever, and we can retrieve those measurements. So somebody said earlier, and I think she's left the room, that you can't measure productivity. Horse pucky. And you can measure the value of engagement, and you can measure continuity of operations, which is what that means. You can measure quantitatively and qualitatively the well-being. And I'm not saying it's all about numbers. It absolutely isn't. I'm the numbers person. There are a lot of other people that can talk about the qualitative, although we'll talk about that too. So somebody else mentioned earlier it was easy to measure productivity in these days, you know, when they were able to reduce the production time by introducing the assembly line widgets. Yeah, real easy to measure. But it's brains these days that we need to measure. And so those are the kinds of metrics we have to put together for if we really want to create valuable metrics. Now let's not confuse productivity and performance. So I don't know how many of you remember the Lucy show. Did I just lose sound? So, you know, on one hand, they're doing really well with this assembly line. The chocolates are coming down. And hello? Okay, the chocolates are coming down in a nice, orderly fashion. They're feeling really good about their jobs, and then all of a sudden they speed up the assembly line and they don't know what to do with them, and so they're eating them and they're stuffing them down their shirt. So, you know, you could measure the productivity and say that, well, they're more productive because more chocolates were gone at the end. You could measure it by their hip width perhaps also, but you're not really measuring performance. And so it really has to be both. It is productivity, it is performance, and so how well were they wrapping the chocolates? In a call center, for example, often they're measured by how many calls they can handle in an hour. Well, okay, but what was the quality of the calls? What was the outcome of the calls? That's important. In software coding, also, you know, how much time it creates as a software engineer to code. That's something you could measure. Well, okay, but what are the defects in the code, and how much customer service and how many releases do we have because it was done that quickly? So it's very important to measure both performance and productivity. Okay, now it's very hard to talk about quantifying things without using a little bit of math. So, you know, no fingers or toes, you're going to be exposed here. But let's just set up the example. $50,000 a year is about an average salary. That actually costs the employer about $65,000 a year with benefits and taxes. So if somebody loses, that's about $8 a day. And if somebody loses 8 minutes a day, it's equal to $2,000 a year. So that's like a fifth of their office space, right? It's not actually going to replace their office costs. I can make the argument that it would replace their office cost if you would just, increase their productivity by a little bit. But the thing that we don't think about, that again, we're not talking across industries, that an economist would think about, is that we're not hired to offset our salary. It's not a very profitable proposition if all we're doing is replacing our salaries. We're supposed to make some multiple. Financial services industry, it's 6 times. So, we should be earning about $400,000 for the company if we're making $65,000 a year. So everything that I'm going to say from now on, I'm not going to include this metric, but tuck it away in the back of your head. Because you don't have to, because this stuff, these numbers are so compelling from a return on investment point of view that you don't even have to include this when you want to make your business case, when you're trying to explain this. Okay, so a little bit of math. So we got that $65,000 person, and now some faith in the fact that we've done a lot of research, and what our research shows is that remote work increases productivity somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 55%. 55% is a pretty big change, and that's in actually the call center industry, which is very metrics oriented, very easy to measure. And you know, when some of them went to a work at home program or a partial work at home program, they just found that productivity went through the roof, quality went through the roof, the ability to attract talent increased. So yeah, that's a pretty big number. But okay, we're going to use the 15% increase, and they're going to be working remotely about half of the time. So that's the value of that is about $5,000 a year. That's about half of their occupancy cost, right? $10,000 being an average occupancy. So okay, there's a measure of productivity. Anybody know what third leagues are? Because you were here before. Galbraith and time motion studies. So that movement is one third leg, and that was another, and this is another, and it was all about reducing those third legs to increase the assembly line times and to improve productivity. Well, these are modern day third legs. Actually, I call them Retzels, which is my name spelled backwards instead of Galbraith. All of these things, time is money. And so all of those unproductive meetings, those unwanted interruptions, each of which takes 15 to 25 minutes to recover from. Your brain just doesn't go back to what it was doing when you're interrupted by somebody. All of those distractions, too hot, too cold, all of the email, all of those things. You can measure this. Find out what it was before the change. Find out what it was after the change. And quantify it. Use that same math that I just used and say, if we, and the way it's going to work out, if you saved a high-paid executive one interruption a day, it would not only pay for the change that you're trying to make, it would pay for over and over again their occupancy cost for years, because typically the change you're making is something that's going to benefit over years and years, right? Changing a facility or adding a well-being program. The benefits of that are going to go out for years and years. So ask the questions, do the surveys, look at your database, find out how much of this is going on. And here are some qualitative measures. You can look at performance reviews. Now, I know one question is going to be, yeah, but how do you know that something else didn't change in the organization or the economy or that bad boss left or whatever? That's all going to happen. But we'll get to some break-evens in a bit. It just doesn't take much to make the business case. And yes, that is going to happen, but when you do these measures over and over and over again, and they start to repeat themselves, it's a pretty compelling argument. Cognitive testing, this is one of the ways they measure productivity and environment. You actually take a test. Do you remember these things? Can you, how long does it take you to create this document, pre and post? And this is some of the places where we get the data for how much productivity increases. How much overtime did you have to do? One of the airlines went to a remote work policy, and so their customer service agents, they tremendously reduced the overtime, because what they found was there were these people that were just willing to jump on the line when there was a snowstorm and the airport was closed down. And so, people from all over the world, these customer service agents who were working at home, would jump on the line, handle it for 15 or 30 minutes, and then go back to what they were doing. Kind of a unique industry, but I suspect. How many of you have a call center in your operation? Yeah, low-hanging fruit. They've had this nailed for over 10 years. We were wearing pagers when the call centers started to use remote workers. So it's just some of the other things that you can use to qualitative to measure performance. Okay, as absenteeism, how do you measure that? How do you value that? The studies show that we're far less absent if we have the opportunity to work remotely. You know, you don't feel so good. You want to lay in bed, but you're probably not going to do nothing all day. So you can work a little bit. You just don't want to be in the office, or shouldn't be in the office, because you don't want to drag whatever you have with you. Also, the primary reason for absenteeism is taking a mental health day or meeting the refrigerator repairman in the convenient hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so having that opportunity in your organization to work remotely drastically cuts that down. Okay, so let's look at the math here. The unscheduled absenteeism days a year, that's typical, 9 days a year. 30% is what the research shows is the reduction in absenteeism as a result of introducing remote work. Times the average salary today, that's the savings. Multiplied across the organization. That's a significant savings. Talent, there's a big one, and it's one that everybody's talking about. But how do you put a number to does remote work increase the attraction and retention of talent? We've been hearing over and over and over again that people want to work flexibly. They want to be able to control where they work, both inside the office and outside the office. They're desperate for a better work-life balance. And there may be some questions about companies that have called back their remote workers, and some studies about the fact that it can actually introduce work-life conflict, and I'll be happy to answer those questions, and I obviously can show you that the research does not prove that out. But that it does attract talent. If you're competing with somebody for talent that offers a flexible program and you don't, you're going to lose talent. And Pat will be up next to talk about, and Alex to talk about some of the statistics that back this up. But 70% of people say they would change jobs if it gave them the opportunity to work remotely, and 30% say they would take a pay cut, up to 10%. Okay, so how do you measure that? So average salary, we know, voluntary turnover a year, people, what they call the quits rate, your HR people should know this number, times the cost of turnover. Now what does that mean? Society for Human Resource Management, all kinds of companies have looked at what does it really cost when you lose an employee. And the numbers range from 35% of salary for non-exempt to 200% or more for exempt. So I cut it in the middle and looked at the data that says we reduced turnover by about 10% as a result of a remote work program. So that's the savings per person per year if we want to quantify retention. Attraction, that's a little bit harder to put a number on, I will admit, but we can look at some of these other things. Intent to leave. Some HR companies, some HR departments do regular surveys, blind surveys about this kind of thing. Track the voluntary turnover, the involuntary turnover. Look at the job board ratings. How do they vary for companies that offer remote work and those that don't? A lot of companies can get the information from exit interviews. How many offers do you put out compared to how many acceptances you have? I'm talking about remote work, but think about that in terms of your workplace change, in terms of your how your place looks. How many people turn you down because it's just an ugly place to work? So all these things can be used when you're talking about all kinds of different workplace strategies. Continuity of operations, this is an easy one, really probably strikes home locally and in a lot of places. And the federal government estimated that they could pay for the entire 5-year cost of their mobile work program in one snow day. Big numbers. If people can't get to work, if they can't do their job, that time is money. You've lost a day's worth of productivity. And it's not like they just go home and work. This is something that you need training, you need experience, you need the technologies and all of that to make it work. Well-being. sit there typing out my presentation on the 11th hour of sitting in my chair, going, what am I doing here? We know, Harvard, the World Health Organization, we can quantify how much time or how much money it costs an organization in absenteeism, presenteeism, that means being at work but not really being there, and healthcare. And so, for example, in the case of stress, people lose an average of 35 minutes a day, 22 days a year as a result of absenteeism and presenteeism. Presenteeism being the great big orange bar. And look at the little gray bar at the bottom, the healthcare. We're so worried about those healthcare costs when really, it's the elephant in the room. It's the people that are coming to work sick or the absenteeism levels. I mean, look at that one on depression. It's just unbelievable. So we can measure this. We can say, if we reduce 10 people from chronic stress, and we know that remote work helps people manage work-life balance, then totally offset the cost of the intervention and pay it back over a very short period of time. And again, if you go to the high-paid executives, you'll find that if you just, one person doesn't become stressed as a result, or is less stressed as a result of this workplace change, it entirely pays for the program. And sometimes that's an easier way to present it, is more in a kind of a break-even. Look, all it would take is this, because that's easy to believe, and you actually don't even have to, prove the measurement. So here's some qualitative ways that we can look at measuring well-being and wellness. A lot of companies do health risk assessments. Again, got to be talking to HR, got to be talking to benefits. We can get this from aggregate data and biometric screening. How are we actually doing? Did blood pressure go down? All of these things are things that are indications of wellness and well-being, and we can measure pre-post. We can measure remote workers versus non-remote workers. And there's more. Creativity and innovation. Creativity happens when we're alone. Innovation happens when we're in groups. We need both. We need quiet time. And biggest reason people want to work at home, want to work remotely, is for quiet time. And we don't get much of it. As I said, every interruption is 15 to 20 minutes. It can easily add up to your whole day. And guess what? We're interrupting ourselves. The biggest interruption in our day is interrupting ourselves. Oh, wait, I want to check this. Oh, I want to check that. Oh, I want to go there. All that multitasking. There was an article in the New York Times about why you hate work. Only 18% of employees say they have time to think, or 21% to focus on one thing. I mean, if you think about creativity and innovation, that's horrible. We've got to give people time to think. And then, of course, there's the planet. You can measure greenhouse gases. You can measure commuter travel. In some cities, you're required to measure these things. In cities that have smog alerts. And it's good for people, too. 3 of their most precious commodities. It saves time, on average 11 days a year. This is getting a half-time remote worker, not spent playing in traffic, all the associated stress with that, on average between $2,000 and $4,000 per employee. And their most precious commodity, their sanity. Now, last thing I want to say is we've got to stop making this a polar conversation. It's more like Goldilocks and the Three Little Bears. It's not whether you have a work-at-home program, whether you have a remote program, or whether you don't. There's a middle, and the middle is the sweet spot. We need time with other people. We need time remote. For some companies, 100% remote works. WordPress, that's how they've operated for years. For others, that's not. It's individual, and you've got to find that sweet spot. So, I would urge you, all of the articles, there's an article in The Atlantic right now, I'm quoted in it. When I talked to the guy, it sounded very balanced. He was eager to talk to all the people that I recommended, and it came out as this big bad thing of remote work and how horrible it is for people. That's what gets the publicity. So I'm done with time, and so I think I have a bit of time for questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Oh, Eric.
The metrics and measurements you're doing, is it safe to say that most of it is correlations between one and another as opposed to causation?
Yes. Yeah, and that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, because if I paint you have to, you can't say if I paint the wall red, this will happen, but if I paint the wall red, this typically happens.
Correct, and it's all in the execution.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
You know, and that's a lot of the headlines. I love Sharon Wall, district administrator for the USGSA, had a line, telework doesn't create management problems, it reveals them. So if you don't know what your people are doing, and if you don't know how to measure them, then you don't know how to measure them when they're sitting right there. And by the way, the occupancy studies say they're not at their desks 60% of the time. So I don't care what you call it, remote work, distributed work, they're already working remotely, whether they're 9 floors, 9 feet, or 9 miles away. And all of the things you needed to do to prepare for remote workers, you need to do for the people all the people that are in your office. Next question. Katie.
Okay, so I agree with you completely that we, and I don't know why, are not measuring the outputs of the work that we do, but we're not. So can you share the top 3 things that you would recommend that the facility managers in this room do tomorrow when they go back to the office? What would you recommend?
Go talk to HR. Get to know the people in HR. Make friends with them. Help them understand that you guys are in this together and that it really is a people thing. That you really want to make the places for people work. And to start that alliance and start that conversation. Start thinking about everything that you do to your workspace as one of those pretzels or third legs. You know, if it's too hot, or it's too cold, or it's not enough light, or they don't like the smell of curry in the office next door. That's actually a genetic thing. I have it. All those things take away from productive hours. And I'm not saying we're going to be productive 100% of the time, but I think a facility manager's job and a manager's job and a CEO's job is to get all that crap out of the way. Let me do what I'm good at. Take all of the obstacles to doing that out of the way. And that includes doing what I do best and you know, a lot of things that we can do with that. But let's just focus, let's just look around our facility and say, what is it that I'm doing here that's preventing people from being their best person? You said 3. I don't have a third one right now.
Kate?
Yes, Chris gets it. Yeah.
Okay, so when you were going through the list of things you could measure, I was sitting there going, yeah, of course. And then I thought, well, actually, is it easy to measure those things? So, for example, if you look at interruptions, how do I measure interruptions for 1,000 people? I mean, those are the sorts of things, it's easy to say, but really difficult to do.
There's some really Internet of Things coming online that are going to make it easy. You know, the biometrics that can tell whether or not I'm talking on the phone or using a computer, whether I'm stressed or not stressed, whether I've just been interrupted by somebody. Some of it is going to be survey data. You know, some of it is going to be observation. And you know, I'm not quite sure why people rely so little on survey data. You know, I've done a pre-post in an organization where introduced remote work, and the people said the thing I love about working at home is I'm not interrupted during the day, or I control the interruptions. And so every one of those, you know, again, when you get the abundance of evidence, we're not going to get this down to, you know, I make it sound like we can get it down to the dollars and cents, of course we can. But in terms of elephant in the room, I think you can start to look at those things. Okay, I'm getting the big you're over sign.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm getting the big there's somebody asking a question sign. Okay, but
Just really, are you seeing a distinction between in multi-generational workforces to the remote work?
no, and no.
You know,
I mean, I'm sorry, but I just this generational conversation we heard yesterday from Gensler, and you know, I've seen it over and over. You know, there are different reasons that people want to work remotely across generations, perhaps, and I wouldn't say across generations as much as life stage. boomers, people that have children, people that don't have children, but across the board, we are just dying for flexibility. In fact, the federal government and a couple of others have done a study that showed just offering people flexibility increased their productivity, their performance, their attraction and retention, because people had a sense of control. That's all they want, sense of control. She says, I'm done, and done. So, okay, let me invite Pat up and Joel.